I attempted to post a news article on Facebook from prophecynewswatch.com, and they removed the article without warning or explanation. So, that said, I think it's worth mentioning that there are certain viewpoints that are indeed being censored on social media platforms. And hopefully they don't decide to censor it, because I've decided to read that article today, as well as a couple of others. So I'm creating another segment on this channel called Breaking News, wherein I will read a selected number of very informative articles concerning different viewpoints and theological perspectives, as well as philosophical implications of these said perspectives. That said, bear in mind that Prophecy News Watch is largely from an evangelical fundamentalist and dispensationalist eschatological framework. Regardless, although I don't particularly adhere to that eschatological model myself, I think it's important that we gain perspective, seeing that this is indeed a comparative theology channel. There are hundreds of different viewpoints, especially in the realm of eschatology. So that said, I'll start by reading, speaking of premillennial dispensationalism, which is largely popular within evangelical circles and among other Christians as well, although not all Christians hold to the premillennial dispensationalist worldview. It's important to know and become informed about this particular view from not only a biblical perspective, but also a philosophical perspective as well. That said, I will refer you to a previous post if you haven't listened to it already. It's depicting the fallacies of premillennial dispensationalist eschatology. And so, tied into that is the idea of a new world order or a deep state conspiracy of global government that is apparently going to transpire in what dispensationalists have called these last days. And so I'm going to read an article from Middlebury Institute of International Studies. The title of the article is The New World Order, the Historical Origins of a Dangerous Modern Conspiracy Theory. And bear in mind that I'm only sharing information. I'm not telling you whom or what to believe. As I read these articles, I may or may not make some brief comments, especially if there's certain things I agree with or disagree with. That said, I'm simply presenting the information so that you can make an informed decision as to what information you should disregard or what information you should embrace in your ongoing theological education. Origins of a Dangerous Modern Conspiracy Theory, the New World Order, the Historical Origins. Quote, Executive Summary. The NWO, or the New World Order Conspiracy Theory, posits that a cabal of elites is working behind the scenes to orchestrate global events to enslave the global populace. Bear in mind that premillennial dispensationalism and left behind fictional theology embraces this idea. Is it dangerous or is it truth? You decide. Continuing, the NWO's theories, anti-Semitic origins, cause adherents to intentionally or unintentionally propagate harmful anti-Semitic narratives. Social media companies must address NWO content on their platforms for its potential to incite hate and offline violence. Something to bear in mind. Overview. The New World Order is a conspiracy theory in which adherents believe that a cabal of powerful elites is secretly implementing a dystopian international governing structure that will grant them complete control over the entire global populace. Under this regime, which to premillennial dispensationalists and those embrace the left behind theology, this global order is, of course, ushered in by what they consider Antichrist to be, according to their own, perhaps narrow interpretation of Scripture. Under this regime, dissidents will be arrested and, according to the Bible, killed, because these dissidents, so-called, are the ones that refuse the apparent future mark of the beast. Dissidents will be arrested and the masses enslaved. Supporters of the conspiracy theory claim that most global leaders are complicit in the establishment of this New World Order, aiding the NWO through the manufacturing of global events such as the coronavirus pandemic and mass shootings, and controlling their associated narratives to sow civil unrest. So they're saying that these elites are sowing civil unrest deliberately in some type of a chaos, order out of chaos theory. The NWO conspiracy theory can be found in the online chatter of fringe conspiracy theorists, while the associated rhetoric within these online groups can appear innocuous. At first, this conspiracy theory presents a real world danger as it promotes a fatalistic worldview for adherents. Of course, believers, according to their eschatological thinking, will not be here. They will have gone up in a supposed rapture. As it promotes a fatalistic worldview for adherents, possibly inclining them to commit violence against communities infrastructure, and individuals deemed complicit in the NWO's implementation. It also asserts that those that are complicit are, for the most part, blindly agreeing and in complicit agreement with these elites. The cabal narrative is commonly associated with other anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that claim Jewish culpability, alleging that they are behind the orchestration of the NWO, leading to an increased danger towards Jewish communities. So the bridge between what people think, how they think, and what is actual could be totally different. While the associated rhetoric within these online groups can appear innocuous at first, this conspiracy theory presents a real-world danger. Anti-Semitic roots. Many modern-day conspiracy theories, including the NWO theory, have anti-Semitic origins. Influential groups and movements from the 19th and early 20th centuries are largely to blame for the proliferation of anti-Semitic narratives. Within these narratives, Jewish people are frequently framed as the orchestrators of global events and accused of creating a supranational governing structure for nefarious purposes. These dangerous narratives are still widely promoted today. And I would add, have largely taken hold within the left behind theology. British Israelism was one of the most religious movements to become a haven for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. A founder of the movement, John Wilson, espoused claims meant to empower Christians by arguing that they, rather than the Jews, are the true descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Wilson demonized the Jewish faith by claiming that Jesus was not a Jew, thus implying that Judaism is grounded in falsehood and evil, a claim that persists today in NWO-adjacent conspiracy theories. And this is also tied into premillennial dispensationalism. Continuing, Wilson played a foundational role in the normalization of religious anti-Semitism within British Israelism, yet it was not until the arrival of Wilson's protege, Edward Hine, the more radical anti-Semitic theories began to intertwine within the movement. Under Wilson's influence, Hine began preaching increasingly explicit anti-Semitic theories, causing the British Israelite movement to attract more anti-Semitic recruits. These increasingly radical views within British Israelism formed a new ideology known as quote-unquote Christian identity. Established throughout Europe and the United States during the 20th century, adherents of Christian identity purport that they are the true Israelites favored by God. And I believe this is also known as replacement theology. Continuing, over time, Christian identity groups grew in size and embraced more explicit anti-Semitic conspiracy theories due to the publication and popularization of anti-Semitic texts. One such text was the American version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which falsely argues Jewish elites' alleged plan for global domination. In conjunction with the Protocol's other conspiracy theories, such as the Zionist Occupied Government, or ZOG, spread and began to be widely cited. The onset of World War II only furthered the targeting of Jews during this time period, solidifying the foundation of anti-Semitism in which modern conspiracy theories arose, including the NWO. The NWO theory in America. While anti-Semitic conspiracy theories flourished globally, the United States in particular experienced a surge of fringe conspiratorial organizations in the mid-20th century that heavily contributed to the widespread acceptance of the NWO. The most famous and popular of these is the John Birch Society, which primarily focused on rooting out communism in the United States by making claims of global plots by communist elites. These claims ultimately laid the foundation for future conspiracy theories of elites striving for global domination. In conjunction with anti-communist conspiracy theories arose the widespread believability of an underground organization pulling societal strings. These days it's known as the deep state, or perhaps the attachment of said secret societies pulling strings behind the NWO, although some perhaps unwittingly, which is a double-blind aspect of said conspiracy theories. These theories, such as the belief in the Illuminati, began to gain popularity, especially gaining traction in the countercultural era of the 60s and 70s America. As a result, the combination of the countercultural interest in secret societies alongside the anti-elite conspiracism of the JBS created the infrastructure for broad belief in the existence that secret global organizations seek control over the United States. This, compounded with the release of Pat Robertson's book, The New World Order, published in 1991. And for those of you who do not know who Pat Robertson is, he is a leader, or was, before his passing, of a large evangelical Christian organization that promotes news, Christian broadcasting news, CBN News rather, and the famous 700 Club show that aired during his lifetime, and perhaps even continues to this day. Cemented the NWO theory as a cornerstone within America's conspiratorial culture. The NWO's application within American discourse can be seen through the reaction to major events such as the 9/11 terrorist attacks. As millions mourned, questions naturally arose as to culpable parties and their potential motives. Whereas most Americans correctly believed Al-Qaeda to be the perpetrator in this circumstance, conspiracy theorists took advantage of the emotional turmoil to further sow their conspiratorial beliefs. NWO adherents were no exception and stood as major players in this conspiratorial competition. Even more recently, we can see presence in response to violent events, with mass shootings an unfortunate commonality in present-day America. Many turn to social media to broadcast their reactions. Without fail, NWO commentary is noticeably peppered within the responses with claims that the NWO orchestrates these mass shootings as false flag events to enact the widespread disarmament of citizens to better conquer them without apparent resistance. Extremism academic Michael Barkun has analyzed conspiratorial frameworks to explain why conspiracy theories like the NWO can spread effectively in these circumstances. Barkun identifies three main principles. They are embraced by conspiratists. 1. Nothing happens by accident. 2. Nothing is as it seems, and I mean absolutely nothing. And 3. Everything is connected. Barkun's principles are evident in the NWO theory, reflecting all three criteria over time. These principles have contributed to the NWO's theory's global influence. And I would add that apocalyptic fiction writers also have a hand in this said so-called conspiracy theory. The NWO and its ties to violence. The FBI has indicated that political conspiracy theories can motivate domestic extremists to participate in criminal and sometimes violent acts. And as a passing thought, January 6th comes to mind. Continuing, in the last decade, the NWO and other conspiracy theories have been cited as an explanation for violence. An example of attempted violence was in October of 2016 when two men, 30-year-old Michael Mansell and 21-year-old James Kenneth Dryden, were arrested for stockpiling weapons in preparation to attack the high-frequency active oil research program, also known as HARP facility. The two men believed that the government-funded HARP facility controlled the weather, preventing Americans from talking to God, and was complicit in making sacrifices for the New World Order cabal. Another incident was in December of 2018 when a man was arrested for planning to blow up what he believed to be a satanic temple monument in order to make America aware of an impending NWO. In both of these examples, the perpetrators were influenced by multiple conspiracy theories demonstrating that the NWO theory overlaps and feeds into other conspiracy theories. The amalgamation of conspiratorial beliefs found online often incites violence offline. Not a good mix. The NWO theory and social media. Today, the NWO theory's success in reaching mainstream audiences is mainly due to its proliferation across social media platforms, both Christian and secular. These platforms' recommendation algorithms, the automated system they use to ensure their uses are matched with material they would find interesting, are essential in the ease and bounds that these conspiracy theories are spread online. In many cases, online users who engage with NWO material online are then recommended other, sometimes more extreme conspiratorial content, thus demonstrating that the NWO theory works as a soft radicalization point. In the last several years, social media companies have struggled to police adherents' online chatter, as their messaging is often inconsistent and thus not always applicable to existing social media policies. For instance, not all NWO conspiracists directly post racist or hateful content in conjunction with their narrative. Some are strictly, perhaps, from a marginal eschatological perspective, where it ties in said theory. Instead, they emphasize misinformative claims. However, because the NWO theory is deeply rooted in anti-Semitism, posts involving allegations of an impending NWO may intentionally or unintentionally propagate hateful and anti-Semitic narratives. Such narratives provide a pipeline for radicalization into more virulent anti-Semitic language, theories, and associated violence. Social media companies must address the proliferation of the NWO theory because of the potential the conspiracy theory has to incite adherents to carry out violence. Adherents of the NWO theory can use the conspiracy theory's malleability to push hateful narratives against any group or individual they deem complicit in the perceived NWO agenda. NWO adherents generally believe that they are victims of a nefarious cabal and are pushed to act in what they believe is self-defense. While social media platforms remove explicitly malicious NWO content, most material remains because of the limitations of the current policies. These policies set a very high threshold for a group or post to be removed from platforms. And I would add, perhaps, maybe, because of this tie-in to an NWO conspiracy theory, Facebook decided to remove the news article post that I am about to share. Continuing, however, social media sites have recently pushed to eliminate content that is considered complex, multifaceted, and implicitly hateful. This adjustment was largely set in motion by the proliferation and the offline manifestation of the QAnon conspiracy theory. In response to this dangerous and harmful conspiracy theory, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter purged thousands of QAnon adherents pages and posts. Some sites, like YouTube, have even gone as far as to add a secret or a sect of their policy directly addressing QAnon. Like QAnon, the NWO theory has radicalized individuals towards violent action. Conclusion. The NWO conspiracy theory has a complex history with a high degree of believability. Taking the license of art into consideration, with movies such as The Rise of Antichrist, etc., within the Left Behind series of books and movies, taking that into consideration as well. Not only that, the conspiracy theory acts as a gateway to further hate and violence and has more radical movements. If NWO adjacent rhetoric is left unchecked on social media platforms, it can lead to further dehumanization, radicalization, and violence. Unquote. Now, the following two articles, bear in mind that they are largely written from a premillennial dispensationalist evangelical perspective. Nevertheless, I'm going to read them so as to inform the listeners and so that you can make informed decision as to whether or not you should consider what they are or perhaps are not saying when they publish these articles. And I'm making these available here, and I'm going to read them to create awareness. And that is the only motive, not to tell you whom or what you should believe theologically or philosophically, or what worldview you should or should not embrace. This is a platform that is all inclusive, if you haven't noticed already. It is also a platform where everyone could be or is equally correct and equally incorrect about certain things, especially concerning theological perspectives, which is another reason why I would emphasize the importance of doing comparative theology, because there's more than one way of seeing a thing, and there are literally hundreds of different ways one can interpret Scripture. That said, from prophecynewswatch.com, here's an article. This particular article was removed from Facebook, perhaps for the reasons that I mentioned in the previous article. Anything to do with said NWO, although it's probably not mentioned, it's implied within the structure of these articles, because it is largely from a premillennialist evangelical perspective. Evangelical Christianity, although a lot of the presuppositions that it maintains are largely not agreed upon by me, many points they make from a biblical worldview are indeed agreeable. So, the name of this article is Welcome to the New Morality, Dramatic World Shift in Americans, concerning a biblical worldview. And this is simply polls, a visiting of polls. In the American Worldview Inventory 2024, and this is recent, George Barna, the director of research at Arizona Christian University's Cultural Research Center, explained our country's 40-year drop in biblical worldview. He described an increasingly prominent shift in society, which Barna attributes to the new morality, quote unquote, sweeping over all sectors of life. Barna, who also serves as a senior fellow at Family Research Council, highlighted that within 5 generations, the national incidence of audits holding a biblical worldview has plummeted from 12% to today's 4% level, a number expected to drop to 2% within the next 15 years. According to the inventory data, 2024 shows a dramatic shift in morals, quote unquote. For instance, the majority of adults hold that issues such as lying, abortion, gay marriage, and rejection of absolute moral truth are morally acceptable. That is, the rejection of said absolute moral truth. Additionally, less than half of all adults embrace the Bible as their primary guide to morality. As the study made clear, millennials have proven to be social disruptors, reshaping the moral belief and behavior norms established by boomers and busters, that is X generation, and Generation Z has merely followed in their footsteps. The research also revealed young adults tend to form their worldview primarily through feelings and personal experiences rather than logic and facts. And over the years, it's noted there have been notable increases of divorce, crime, war, terrorism, bullying, pedophilia, child trafficking, human trafficking in general, which inevitably affects younger generations who have lived with these things as a part of their life's narrative, shaping the way they view right and wrong. Drawing his own conclusions from the report on Friday's episode of Washington Watch, David Klassen, FRC's director of the Center for Biblical Worldview, agreed with Barma that the term new morality is an appropriate way to describe current social or societal circumstances. There really is a new morality that is guiding the American public, he said, and I think what we can trace this to is that there has been a tectonic shift in the animating worldview that drives American adults. And this is observing that it is largely not biblical. He went on to explain that what these studies show is that increasingly Generation Z holds to beliefs and attitudes that are more out of step with Scripture than even the previous generation. Klassen compared some statistics to better convey this idea. When you look at the baby boomer generation today, he said 60% broadly accept abortion, and when you look at the millennial and Gen Z generations, it goes up to 70%. Additionally, 60% of baby boomers and 70% of Gen Z believe it's morally acceptable to have consensual sex amongst unmarried adults. Evidently, the shift in worldview is affecting our overall morality, and it's ultimately showing up in how we look at policy and politics. Klassen stated, guest host and former Congressman Jody Heiss agreed. He added that politics is just a reflection of the society and the culture as a whole, pointing out the same is true for individual members of Congress. They literally represent every single district across the country. Heiss explained, and so you look at the way that they act, the way that they vote, the things that they say, the things they do, the backstabbing, and you understand this is just a reflection of our country. He lamented, it seems like in every category, there's a decline in biblical worldview. Why is this the case? According to Klassen, the cultural, being both the historical and biblical illiterate, plays a major role. He said that the low number of people with a biblical worldview, the 4%, is not something that happens overnight. He further emphasized that the last few decades have been seen Christianity lose the respectability that it once had, the influence that it once had. We've seen that previous adult generations have really dropped the ball when it comes to discipleship and catechizing their children. A noteworthy statistic Klassen highlighted to help elaborate the root of this issue is that 55% of millennials and 66% of Gen Z believe it's morally acceptable to engage in any behavior so long as it doesn't apparently or appear to harm anybody. And what exactly does this reveal? According to Clausen, quote, it shows that there's no understanding of absolute moral truth. There's no understanding that there really is an objective right and an objective wrong. Considering this, Heiss asked how those who do hold a biblical worldview can combat these statistics, a question first tackled by Barma's report. Unfortunately, the report concluded these results can be a source of both hope and despair. While America is witnessing the destruction of biblical morality, Barma, who directed the research project, emphasized there's still hope to form a nation of people who are kinder, more compassionate and understanding, generous, and have reasonable hope for the future. This hope, he asserted, is fueled by what he referred to as integrated disciples. Clausen explained that an integrated disciple describes someone who takes the Bible seriously. He continued, they not only believe the teachings of Scripture, but they live those out. When the Bible gives us teachings and principles, an integrated disciple who is one who has internalized that and their values, their lifestyles, and their decision-making consistently goes through the biblical filter. Notably, Clausen urged these integrated disciples are the most happy and most fulfilled people in our society. And as such, concluded, their attitudes, values, lifestyles, and level of hope is unlike anything else I see on the national landscape. We learn best by modeling ourselves after those who have figured out what we are questioning. Integrated disciples appear to be viable role models for the life that millions of Americans have found elusive. Originally published at the Washington Stand. End of article. And now I'm going to tack on another related article from prophecynewswatch.com. And like I said, form your own opinion. I won't tell you whom or what you should believe. Although the gist of this article is something that all stripes of Christians should pay attention to. Whether you're a premillennialist dispensationalist who holds to an NWO conspiracy theory or not. This is important to know because this is what is coming forward and this is what people think. That said, is America becoming an antichrist nation? An important question to ponder. Quote, once upon a time, America was a Christian nation. I know that many on the left cringe when they read a statement like that, but it's true. Added comment, Christian nationalism, unfortunately, has taken hold because of the propagation of this idea. Although it is partially true, America started initially with Christian colonies. That said, continue. For most of our history, the population of the U.S. was overwhelmingly Christian, and the values that governed our society were primarily Christian values. But of course, everything has changed in recent decades, and I would add that it's slowly changed over the past 200 years, give or take. When Barack Obama boldly declared that, quote, we do not consider ourselves a Christian nation, unquote, in 2009, he was speaking the truth. And it is true. We are not exclusively, at least not like we were during colonial times. We are no longer a Christian nation, and we haven't been for a very long time. So if we aren't a Christian nation at this point, what exactly are we? So I would add a comment here. What are we? I would say unequivocally we are an interfaith nation who believes in upholding religious freedom. That is what America stands for at this point. Interfaith. And to adapt, yes, to adapt to that change, it's important to take on an interfaith perspective, I would add. And interfaith ministry, I would say at this point, is indeed a beacon of light, if there are any, within the realm of religion and theology. So, if we aren't a Christian nation at this point, what exactly are we? Interfaith. That is what we are. According to the Pew Research Center, 64% of Americans still consider themselves to be quote-unquote Christians in 2020. About 64% of Americans call themselves Christian. There's the identity aspect. That might sound a lot like, but 50 years ago, that number was 90%. According to a 2020 Pew Research study, the same survey said the Christian majority in the U.S. may disappear by 2070. And I believe it's probably going to happen before that. And I would also add that I don't think that Christianity will die out, but rather adapt and grow, in fact, out of this mess, if you will. Christian pluralism, I believe, perhaps, could take precedence, and maybe an exclusivist Christian theology is unsustainable, considering the research and the times that we're in. If nearly two-thirds of your people consider themselves to be Christians, that would seem to indicate that you are a Christian nation. But we obviously are not. Just look around. Many of the signs and symbols and messages that we see all around us are overtly anti-Christian. So in one way, shape, or form, the Bible predicts this, that an antichrist spirit would take hold among the world's nations just prior to the said second coming of Christ. Continuing. So what in the world is going on? Ultimately, there are lots of Americans that still identify themselves as quote-unquote Christians, even though they have completely abandoned everything that Christianity represents. Not necessarily. They may have upheld an alternative theological perspective, perhaps, without completely rejecting or abandoning everything that Christianity represents. I myself, for instance, as an interfaith minister, do not reject what Christianity represents. I embrace it. But in so doing, I don't reject other spiritual traditions that are in good communication with the Christian tradition. I believe in productive interfaith dialogue. Joe Biden is a perfect example. He says that he is a quote-unquote Christian and he attends church regularly, but then the rest of the time he is working very hard against virtually everything the Bible teaches. Of course, he's far from alone. And that's politics for you, of course. According to George Barma, 6% of Americans had a biblical worldview in 2020, and by 2023 that figure has dropped to just 4%. The first national study of Americans' worldview, see the COVID-19 lockdown, shows that the incidence of biblical worldview has fallen to a mere 4%, a drop of 1/3 from the 6% recorded just 3 years earlier. In fact, the 6% benchmark recorded in January 2020, may prove to be the high watermark of the biblical worldview among American adults for the foreseeable future, according to a new report from the American Worldview Inventory 2023 from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. I wish that I could tell you that its numbers aren't accurate, but I can't. Barma says that there is a second group that has a substantial number of beliefs and behaviors consistent with biblical principles, but unfortunately that group fell from 25% of the population in 2020 to just 14% in 2023. The number of adults who don't possess a biblical worldview, or for that matter, a Bible, but still hold a substantial number of beliefs and behaviors consistent with biblical principles, has also fallen dramatically. Only 1 of every 7 adults, that's 14%, belong to the category of what Barma identifies as an emergent follower. That number was 25% only 3 years ago. When you add the first two groups together, it comes to a grand total of 18% of the population. This is just depressing. So what about everyone else? Well, just about everyone else would fall into Barma's world citizen category. The bulk of the American adult population, 82%, falls into the world citizen category, described as people who may embrace a few biblical principles, perhaps not knowing, but generally believe and behave in ways that are distinct from biblical teaching. According to the report, this group has grown substantially from the 69% registered in 2020. I think that the term world citizen perfectly describes most people these days. Sadly, on at least some level, the vast majority of the population has embraced the new values that are constantly being pushed on us by the Western elite. And this is clearly showing up in the poll numbers. Survey after survey has shown that close to 2/3 of the U.S. population disapproves of the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. Here is just one example. About 2/3, 65%, opposed the 2022 Supreme Court decision. Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health Organization, and 34% approve, numbers that have remained effectively unchanged since CNN's polling across the nearly 2 years since the ruling. Those who strongly disapprove of the decision continue to outnumber those who strongly approve of a more than 2-1 margin. We live in a country in which clearly 2/3 of the population claims to be Christian, but nearly two-thirds of the population also wants Roe versus Wade back. That doesn't make any sense at all. Survey on the other topics tell a similar story. According to a Gallup survey that was conducted last year, 71% of the population approves of gay marriage, and a Gallup survey that was conducted earlier this year discovered that 22.3% of Generation Z adults now identify as LGBTQ+. I have my own theories as to why that might be, but I'll leave that out because perhaps to avoid more controversy. Continuing, overall, each younger generation is about twice as likely as the generation that preceded it to identify as LGBTQ. More than 1 in 5 Gen Z adults ranging in age from 18 to 26 in 2023 identify as LGBTQ+. As do nearly 1 in 10 millennials aged 27 to 42. The percentage drops to less than 5% of Generation X, 2% of baby boomers, and 1% of the so-called silent generation. Bisexuality is the most common LGBTQ+ status among Generation Z, Millennials, and Generation X. 15% of all Generation Z adults, representing more than two-thirds of those with an LGBTQ+ identification, are so-called bisexual. What values are being relentlessly promoted by just about every major institution in our society? Is Christ and his values that are being promoted? Or is it the opposite? At this point, even the U.S. military is systematically promoting values that are directly opposed to the values that we find in the Bible. Judicial Watch announced today it received 25 pages of records regarding drag shows, drag story hours, and other pride events for military personnel and their dependent minors, organized and paid for by the U.S. Air Force. The documents were obtained through a May 5, 2023 Freedom of Information Act request submitted by the U.S. Department of Defense, by Judicial Watch, and Catholic Vote Civic Action. The Defense Department issued at least half a dozen no records responses to the FDIA request prior to finally releasing these records. Jesus said that you would know a true tree by the fruit that it produces. Needless to say, the fruit that America is producing is not Christian fruit. It's not biblical fruit. Originally published at End of the American Dream. So, according to this article, America is becoming an antichrist nation. Just the opposite, complete opposite, and in fact, in opposition to Christ in many ways. Although perhaps in very subtle ways. End of article. And you can review all of these articles from prophecynewswatch.com. Whether you're an evangelical premillennial dispensationalist or not, they are informative. And it gives you an idea as to what fellow believers may or may not be thinking. That said, I thank you for listening. Blessings to you and yours.